Good evening, Dominic. Thank you so much for your time. Just perhaps broadly, what you make of the attack on the Joburg system, but also on the banks.
So this morning, the cat was thrown amongst the pigeons with this news that there were these multiple attacks and they all seemed related. So we've been sort of trying to work out what's actually going on. It seems they aren't related. So the attack against the City of Joburg and the attack that Sabrik was talking about against the banks, those seem like separate events.
Let's start then with the one on the City of Johannesburg.
So we don't have a lot of information other than what the attackers are now saying. They appear to have a Twitter account and they're emailing journalists with some information. And so what the attacker claims, if they're really the attacker and if it's true, we're not sure, is that they've managed to compromise critical internal systems, including things like the website. They were able to take the website down to demonstrate that they had this access. They can access sort of the internal systems that control passwords and logons to user systems. And they took about 1 terabyte of data, they claim, and they're asking for these 4 bitcoins to return the data and tell the City of Joburg how they did this hack. So that's what the attacker claims. What City of Joburg has published is just that they know about an attack, they've taken some systems offline, they're looking into it. So they provided very little information.
And they are also investigating from what our reporters were told. But looking at like sort of past experience, what kinds of people would sort of do something like this for what reason?
This is really speculation. If you're looking at if somebody's trying to demand a ransom for money, it feels more like an opportunist. It's a criminal opportunist. This is in contrast to something like an intelligence organization that wouldn't want to be detected. They certainly wouldn't announce their presence. Or if there was a criminal syndicate operating, they might be trying to steal a large amount of money, again, not being detected until that money had gone missing. So the fact that they've declared themselves to the organization trying to get this ransom, it feels a lot more opportunistic. This isn't a highly sophisticated...
But opportunistic as they might be, they are not to be underestimated or dismissed.
You know, I think that's the problem. If a criminal's broken into your system and is holding your data ransom, you can't ignore them, unfortunately, as much as you'd like to.
Now, what then do people who normally usually succeed in warding them off or catching them, what do they typically do in situations like these?
I mean, I can only guess what the City of Joburg is going through internally, and my heart goes out to the people who I'm sure are working very long nights at the moment. The first thing would be to try and evict the attackers from your network. Because they have privileged access to your network, that's not a simple matter. You don't turn off one computer and it's done. If they can come in through VPNs, if they can come in through Wi-Fi, if they can have physical access to the network maybe, then you've got to find the ways that they got in and disable those. So in some cases it's a blanket, let's disable all access till we can figure that out. And in some cases it's maybe more targeted if you have evidence. After you've evicted them from the network and you're certain of it, because it's kind of difficult to work out if you have been successful, you then need to start doing some damage control. What did they get access to? Can we reduce the use of that later on? Hypothetically, if they had a database that was encrypted, could we prevent them getting the key to decrypt it? Something like that. And the rest of it just becomes PR at that point, beyond the technical measures of fixing whatever hole they got in and making sure they're not able to do that again. They now have to deal with a potential PR nightmare of if these attackers do release this information. And we might have to deal with a potential nightmare of ratepayer information being on the public internet.
Now, from what you know, do public institutions like municipalities actually invest in this area of their operation to make sure that when situations like these happen, they are able to actually protect the integrity of, obviously, of the information, but also of the very institution?
Absolutely. How much they invested, I don't know. And I mean, do you invest in home security? Of course you do, but it doesn't mean that somebody won't be able to break into your home. And so the question is, did they invest enough in the right places? But I think we end up in a route where we end up victim shaming a lot. I mean, there are criminals who have broken into this place. Unless somebody can prove negligence, the City of Joburg is not necessarily at fault here. It's the criminals who are at fault for breaking in. And there's many potential ways they can get in. And cybercrime is a complex problem that I don't think anyone can put their hand up and say we've managed to solve. So I would sort of err on the side of caution until I hear more information as to what actually happened.
But potentially, assuming the worst here, what could happen to the information at the municipality's disposal? What can a hacker do with the kind of information a municipality would typically have?
Well, so if we think about the information they might have, they're going to have personal information, ID numbers, names, addresses, and then there might be some metadata that you can pull. So, for example, your property taxes might indicate the size of your property. So if we needed to know, or if people were interested in stalking you, they could find out information about you that you wouldn't want public. It's equally true about me. That would be very uncomfortable. Then there might be internal employee information. You can imagine the havoc if salaries were published, for example, and people noticed what people were being paid. I think that can cause a lot of trouble in organizations. Beyond that, I think the rest might be salacious emails between people that they might try and embarrass people with. But my main worry would be the ratepayer financial and personal information in particular.
Now, let's go to the banks one. Now, the South African Banking Risk Information Center confirms that banks had been hit by these, they call it ransom-driven distributed denial of service attacks. What exactly does that mean? Sounds a bit like gobbledygook.
So a denial of service attack is quite literally what it says. You're trying to prevent the internet from working. You're denying that service from working. There's a couple of ways it can happen, but the most common is what would be called a volumetric attack. So we send so much internet traffic at a place that it can't service normal traffic. Somebody once described it as it's a bit like a taxi parking itself across the highway. It's blocking the lanes. There's too much traffic. It can't get through. So what kind of denial of service attack they're doing, we're not 100% sure. But if there's one place you probably aren't going to be successful with the denial of service attack in South Africa, it would be our local banks. They've had these kinds of ransom attacks for years now. They've specifically procured services to defend against it. It's actually one of the areas where they're well protected.
But then, what then does that tell us about the attacker? Does it mean these are amateurs? I mean, because if they know that the banks invest a great deal in this area of their operations, why would they even try?
We have so little information about this attack. So we haven't seen any obvious consequences. Standard Bank had an outage yesterday, which they then clarified had nothing to do with this kind of attack. So without obvious consequences, it's difficult to guess. Sabric was saying this was multi-jurisdictional, so it wasn't just South African institutions that were being targeted. So we're really guessing about what the attacker might be doing. Maybe they're practicing, maybe it's an ineffective attempt and they're not realizing it's ineffective. Maybe it's a misconfiguration of attacker infrastructure. We're not 100% sure. And so it's very difficult to even guess what the attacker's motives are to do something like that.
Shouldn't it be a worry that, there is every indication that they come from other jurisdictions? What if they were trying perhaps new tricks that they may have up their sleeve?
Well, if they're trying
this was the testing ground.
Maybe, but it didn't work. So I'm not sure what signal that gives them other than to maybe improve things. There was that cartoon from years ago on the internet, Nobody Knows If You're a Dog. You don't need to be in a country to attack a country, and it doesn't need to be a foreign country targeting us. It could be an individual with an internet connection, because the attack won't come from the individual with their laptop. With a distributed denial of service attack, you need to get lots of different systems on the internet to all send their traffic at one point. So either that could be a network of compromised machines, or there could be malware installed on hundreds of thousands of machines across the internet, which has now been instructed to send that traffic. Sometimes there's bizarre interactions with protocols on the internet where you can send a message to one place and it'll send a response to another. And if you get enough doing that, it can kind of amplify things. We haven't had any details on what kind of attack it is. So if you look at where the traffic's coming from, it doesn't necessarily tell you something, because it could be coming from somewhere legitimate in the case of that reflection. It could be coming from somewhere compromised that has nothing to do with the attacker in the case of the other one. So attribution on the internet purely by the source IP address, which would be the phrase, is very difficult to do. You need other MO information, modus operandi information, to try and tie it to a particular group or an attacker.
When all's been said and done, do the customers of South African banks have anything to worry about, at least at this stage?
I think of all the institutions in South Africa, the banks have invested the most in cybersecurity for the longest. So personally, for all the things I worry about in South Africa, that's probably the one place I'm slightly less worried. I'd be far more worried about places like our municipalities, which haven't had as much investment over as much time. And we're now seeing consequences come out of that.
Well, let's hope that indeed is the situation. Dominic, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you for your time.